The principal of Northwood Elementary was halfway through his morning announcements when the first vibration hit. A coffee mug trembled on his desk. Then came the sound, distant at first, like approaching thunder on a clear day. What in the world? The rumble grew into a roar that shook the foundations of the small suburban school. Children froze at their desks, teachers rushed to windows, and there they were, not 10 bikes, not 50. 350 motorcycles filled the horizon, chrome gleaming in the morning sun. A sea of leather-clad riders, with faces etched by hard lives and harder choices. Hell's Angels, Mongols, bandidos, outlaws, rival clubs that would normally shoot each other on sight, now riding side by side in perfect formation. They weren't here for violence. They were here for justice. What happens when 350 of America's most feared bikers show up at an elementary school? I'll tell you what happens. Everything changes. Have you ever witnessed someone being torn apart by bullies, feeling that burn in your chest, knowing you should step in but frozen by fear? That moment when doing what's right seems impossible because the price feels too steep. For 10-year-old Marcus Washington, that moment came yesterday. Just a quiet black kid in a mostly white school, Marcus had perfected the art of invisibility. Keep your head down, don't make waves, survive. Until he saw 3 boys cornering a small blonde girl named Lily in the gym, calling her retard because she couldn't read right. Something snapped inside him. What Marcus didn't know was who Lily's father was, a high-ranking Hell's Angel known as Bear Anderson. And what those bullies didn't know was that they had just triggered a war. Bullying destroys lives silently. Every 7 minutes, a child is bullied on a school playground. Every day, 160,000 kids stay home because they're too terrified to face their tormentors. But sometimes, heroes arrive from the shadows. Sometimes salvation comes with a thunderous roar. What if I told you that one black boy's courage to defend a white biker's daughter would unite rivals, silence bullies, and change an entire community overnight? What if standing up for one person could unleash a storm so powerful that its echoes would be felt for generations? This isn't just another feel-good story. This is about what happens when the code of the streets meets the innocence of a schoolyard. When the most feared men in America become guardian angels for the most vulnerable. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell, because stories like this don't come around every day. If you've ever stood up to a bully or wish you had the courage to, drop a comment below. I personally read every single one. Now back to that parking lot where 350 motorcycles have just gone silent. Helmets come off, boots hit pavement. Leather creaks as giants of men stand shoulder to shoulder. And walking between them, head held high for the first time in his life, is 10-year-old Marcus Washington, flanked by a small blonde girl and her mountain of a father. The bullies who had threatened to get him after school are now pressing themselves against the wall, faces white with terror. Because sometimes one brave act is all it takes to change everything. And sometimes family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who's willing to spill theirs for you. Marcus Washington had figured out the secret to surviving Northwood Elementary by the 2nd week of 1st grade. Be invisible. Not the cool kind of invisible like in comic books, the kind where you move through hallways without leaving a ripple. The kind where teachers sometimes forgot to call your name during roll. The kind where you could sit at the same lunch table for weeks, and kids still asked, "Wait, are you new here?" Being one of only 3 black kids in his grade made true invisibility impossible. His dark skin stood out against the sea of white faces like a period at the end of a sentence. But Marcus had perfected what he called his ghost walk. Eyes down, shoulders slightly hunched, steps quick but quiet. Not running. Running got you noticed. But not dawdling either. Just fading. "Keep your head down and your grades up," his father always said. Marcus took the first part literally. He'd mastered the art of walking while reading, peripheral vision trained on the floor tiles to avoid collisions. His books were his shields, raised just high enough to block his face from anyone looking for easy targets. And there were always kids looking for easy targets at Northwood Elementary. Marcus's bedroom at home told a different story than his quiet school persona. Galaxy posters covered every inch of his ceiling. Model rockets stood like sentinels on his bookshelves. His collection of space books had outgrown its designated shelf and now formed neat stacks on his floor. Black holes, distant planets, the possibility of alien life. "You've got the whole universe in your head," his mom would say, ruffling his tight curls. And he did. At night, lying in bed, Marcus would close his eyes and travel to distant stars, free from the gravity of school hallways and playground politics. But it wasn't just space that captured his imagination. Nights featured heavily in his reading too. Brave warriors standing against impossible odds, protected by shining armor and an unbreakable code of honor. He kept these books hidden deeper in his backpack. Something about other kids seeing him reading about knights felt too revealing, like they might guess he was imagining himself as the hero. And heroes got noticed. Heroes got targeted. Marcus had learned the unwritten rules of Northwood Elementary through careful observation. Rule number 1. Don't stand out. Not for your clothes, your lunch, your answers in class, or especially your skin color. Being black already made him different. He couldn't afford additional attention. Rule number 2. Stay away from the power spots, the back of the bus, the far corner of the playground by the old oak tree, the third bathroom stall that somehow always had a working lock. These were claimed territories where the school's food chain was most brutally enforced. Rule number 3. Laugh when they laugh, but not too loud. Nod when they nod, but not too eagerly. Echo just enough to blend in without being seen as trying too hard. Rule number 4. Never, ever take sides in someone else's battle. This was the golden rule, the one that kept you safe. When Kevin Collins and his crew found a target, you didn't interfere. You didn't make eye contact with the victim. You certainly didn't help. You became extra invisible, grateful it wasn't you this time. His parents had no idea about these rules. At home, he was just Marcus, bright, talkative, full of facts about neutron stars and medieval weapons. He'd catch himself sometimes, laughing too loudly at dinner or speaking with too much excitement about a new book, and have to remind himself that home Marcus and school Marcus were different people. "How was school today?" his mother would ask, and Marcus would shrug. "Fine," he'd say, not mentioning how he'd taken the long way to math class to avoid Kevin and his friends, not talking about the lunch he'd eaten alone in the library corner, a book propped in front of him like a force field, not explaining how he'd deliberately missed 3 questions on a quiz because getting a perfect score 2 weeks in a row might make him visible. The balancing act exhausted him. Be smart, but not too smart. Be friendly, but not too friendly. Be present, but not too present. Every day was a tightrope walk above a canyon of potential humiliation. Marcus had learned early that for some kids at Northwood, his blackness was ammunition, loaded and waiting for the right moment. The day in 2nd grade when Tyler James had called him chocolate milk during lunch, and everyone had laughed, taught him that. The time in 3rd grade when Emma Watson had asked if she could touch his hair like he was some kind of zoo exhibit confirmed it. The whispered comments about basketball that followed him in gym class, even though he preferred astronomy. Club hammered it home, so he built his walls higher, made himself smaller, cultivated the perfect level of forgettable. His teacher, Mrs. Peterson, called him quietly capable during parent-teacher conferences. What she didn't understand was that quietly capable was his survival strategy. Every assignment completed without flair. Every question answered correctly, but without enthusiasm. Every project done well enough for a B+, but never quite an A that might get displayed in the hallway. In the school library, his sanctuary, Marcus had one special spot behind the reference section where he could see anyone approaching before they saw him. Here, during recess on rainy days, he would journey to distant planets or ride alongside noble knights. Here, he could temporarily set down the exhausting weight of invisibility. Most days, Marcus could navigate Northwood's treacherous waters without incident. He had calculated the exact pace to walk between classes, the perfect seat in each room, never front row, never back row, 3rd seat from the left in the middle, and the precise volume at which to speak when called upon. Until that Tuesday morning when Mrs. Peterson announced, "Class, we have a new student joining us today." And Lily Anderson walked into his carefully balanced world. She came in like a whisper. Mrs. Peterson's hand rested lightly on the new girl's shoulder as she introduced her to the class. "Everyone, this is Lily Anderson. She just moved here from Cleveland. I expect you all to make her feel welcome." Marcus glanced up from his book just long enough to take in the essential details. Small for a 4th grader. Hair the color of wheat fields, pulled back in a messy ponytail. Clothes that were clean but faded. Jeans with a worn spot at one knee. A blue sweater that hung slightly too loose. But it was her eyes that made him look twice. Gray like storm clouds, scanning the room with a wariness he recognized immediately. Those were the eyes of someone who knew what it meant to be a target. Mrs. Peterson pointed to an empty desk 2 rows over from Marcus. "You can sit there, Lily." The new girl nodded without speaking and made her way to the desk, keeping her gaze fixed on the floor. Marcus noticed how she hunched her shoulders slightly, the universal posture of someone trying to make themselves smaller. He recognized that walk. It was his own ghost walk. For the first 2 days, Lily was just another face in the classroom. Quiet, forgettable, answering questions when called on, but never raising her hand, eating lunch alone, standing against the wall during recess. Marcus observed her from a distance, the way he observed everything at Northwood, carefully, without engagement. Then came Wednesday's reading circle. "Let's continue with Chapter 4 of Bridge to Terabithia," Mrs. Peterson said, settling into her chair. "Lily, since you're new, would you like to read the first paragraph?" Marcus saw the panic flash across Lily's face, a split-second widening of those storm cloud eyes before she nodded stiffly. She opened the book to the marked page and began to read. J. Jesse woke up in the mean morning with a feeling of dread. She stopped, took a breath. He tried to. She frowned at the page, lips moving silently, to figure out what was wrong. Each word seemed to cost her tremendous effort. Letters appeared to shuffle and rearrange themselves on the page before her eyes. Then he remembered that today was Friday, Kevin Collins interrupted from across the circle, his voice dripping with fake helpfulness. "Seriously, it's right there on the page." A few kids snickered. Mrs. Peterson shot Kevin a warning look. "Kevin, we don't interrupt. Lily, please continue." But the damage was done. Lily's cheeks had flushed deep red. Her hands were trembling slightly as she stared at the jumble of letters that refused to stay put. I can't," she whispered. "It's okay," Mrs. Peterson said gently, finally recognizing what was happening. "Tommy, would you continue? Please." As Tommy picked up reading, Marcus watched Kevin lean over to whisper something to his two sidekicks, Zach and Tyler. The three of them glanced at Lily and snickered behind their hands. Marcus had seen this movie before. He knew exactly how it would play out. By lunch that day, it had already started. "Hey, dummy," Kevin called as Lily walked into the cafeteria carrying her tray. "Need help reading the menu, or do you just point and grunt?" Zach and Tyler laughed too loudly. A few other kids joined in, eager to align themselves with Kevin's crew rather than risk becoming targets themselves. Lily kept walking, her eyes fixed on the floor, but Marcus saw her shoulders stiffen. She sat alone at the far end of a table and picked at her food without eating. The next day, it escalated. Lily's pencil case mysteriously disappeared during gym class, only to reappear in the toilet in the girls' bathroom. When Mrs. Peterson asked the class who was responsible, 24 pairs of eyes studied the floor. No one saw anything. No one knew anything. On Friday, Lily brought a book from home, something with dragons on the cover. During free reading time, Marcus noticed her tracing the words with her finger, lips moving silently as she worked through each sentence. She seemed lost in the story, a small smile softening her face for the first time all week, until Kevin walked by and, accidentally, knocked it from her hands, sending it skidding across the floor. "Oops," he said with exaggerated concern. "Sorry about that. Guess you weren't getting far in it anyway, right?" Tyler picked up the book, holding it upside down. "Is this how you read it?" he asked, drawing more laughs. Mrs. Peterson was helping another student and didn't notice. Lily retrieved her book without a word, but Marcus saw her blinking rapidly to hold back tears. From his corner of the classroom, Marcus observed it all. He saw how Kevin and his friends would wait for Lily in the hallway, making sheep sounds when she passed. He watched them trip her in the lunch line and then apologize loudly. "Sorry, didn't see you there, dummy," making sure everyone heard the insult. He noticed how other girls who might have befriended Lily kept their distance, not wanting Kevin's attention to shift to them. And he saw how Lily grew smaller each day, how her shoulders hunched more, her voice became softer, her storm cloud eyes more distant. Something uncomfortable twisted in Marcus's stomach when he watched it happen. The same feeling he got when he read about knights who saw injustice but rode past without raising their swords. The books he loved were full of heroes who stood up for those who couldn't stand for themselves. But reality wasn't a book. In reality, heroes became targets. His carefully constructed invisibility depended on rule number 4. Never take sides in someone else's battle. But at night, lying in bed staring at his galaxy posters, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Lily's face when Kevin knocked her book to the floor. Couldn't forget the way her hands trembled as she tried to read aloud. Couldn't ignore the fact that each day she seemed to fade a little more. The knight in his favorite book would know what to do. Sir Gawain wouldn't hesitate to defend someone weaker. But Sir Gawain had armor and a sword, and the whole round table behind him. Marcus had none of those things. He told himself it wasn't his problem. Told himself she'd either learn to be invisible like him, or her family would move again. Kids like Lily always seem to move eventually. Told himself that breaking rule number 4 would destroy 4 years of careful work staying under the radar. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. It lived in his chest now, a constant pressure that made it hard to breathe sometimes. When he saw Kevin and his friends surrounding Lily at the water fountain, laughing as she tried to shrink into herself, something inside Marcus shifted. Knights didn't look away from dragons. They faced them. The rain hammered against the gymnasium windows like impatient fingers. Outside, the playground had transformed into a network of muddy puddles, forcing recess indoors for the third consecutive day. The gym echoed with the sounds of pent-up energy, sneakers squeaking against polished floors, basketballs bouncing, children's voices competing to be heard. Marcus sat alone on the bottom row of bleachers, knees pulled to his chest. He'd claimed this spot strategically, visible enough that teachers wouldn't think he was hiding, hidden enough that Kevin's crew rarely noticed him. His dog-eared copy of The Sword in the Stone lay open on his lap, but his eyes kept drifting over the top of the page. Lily was sitting cross-legged in a corner, her dragon book propped on her knees. She'd found her own hiding spot, and for 3 days it had worked. But Marcus saw them before she did. Kevin, Zach, and Tyler breaking away from a basketball game, their heads tilted together as they pointed in her direction. His stomach clenched. He should look away, should bury himself deeper in his book, should remember rule number 4. Instead, he watched as the 3 boys sauntered toward Lily, cutting off her exit path to the door. "Hey, dummy," Kevin said, loud enough that his voice carried across the gym, but not so loud that the distracted teacher on duty would hear. "Still trying to read that baby book?" Lily closed her book, clutching it to her chest like armor. "Leave me alone," she said, her voice barely audible over the gym noise. "What was that?" Tyler cupped a hand to his ear, leaning forward mockingly. "We can't hear you. Maybe you should sound it out. You know, like Mrs. Peterson makes the kindergartners do?" Lily stared at the floor, her knuckles white around her book. She tried to stand up, but Zach shifted to block her path. "My dad says they're testing you for special ed," Kevin said, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper that Marcus could barely hear from his position. "Says you'll probably be in the retard class by next week." Marcus felt his face grow hot. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. He should stay put. Should remain invisible. Should. "I heard your dad's some kind of biker trash," Kevin continued, emboldened by Lily's silence. "My dad says the only people who ride those motorcycles are druggies and criminals. Is that true? Is your dad a criminal? Is that why you're so stupid? Bad genes?" Something snapped inside Marcus's chest. Before he could think about what he was doing, before the calculating part of his brain could remind him about rule number 4 and invisibility, and the careful balance he'd maintained for years, he was on his feet. His book tumbled to the floor, forgotten. His legs carried him across the gym floor, each step feeling like he was pushing through quicksand. His throat was dry, his palms were sweating, but he kept walking until he was standing directly behind Kevin. "Hey," he said, and was surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "Leave her alone." Kevin turned slowly, his expression one of genuine shock. For a moment, he seemed too surprised to be angry. "What did you say, Washington?" Marcus swallowed hard. He could feel dozens of eyes turning toward the unfolding scene. His invisibility cloak was dissolving with each second he stood there, but he couldn't back down now. "I said, leave her alone." He moved to stand between Kevin and Lily, his back straight, his hands curled into fists at his sides. He'd never been in a fight before, had no idea how to throw a punch, but something about the knights in his books gave him strength. She didn't do anything to you." Kevin's surprise morphed into a sneering smile. "Well, well, look who found his voice." He glanced at Zach and Tyler, who had moved to flank him like loyal lieutenants. "The quiet boy wants to be a hero." He stepped closer to Marcus, using his 3-inch height advantage to loom over him. "What are you, her boyfriend?" His voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for Marcus. "You should stick with your own kind." The words hit Marcus like a slap. He'd heard them before, whispered in hallways or muttered under breath when teachers weren't listening, but never so directly, never so boldly. Kevin shoved Marcus hard in the chest. "Get out of the way, Washington. This isn't about you." Marcus stumbled back a step, but didn't fall, and he didn't move aside. He just looked Kevin in the eye, silent defiance radiating from him like heat. For a moment, the 3 bullies seemed unsure what to do. They had expected him to run, to cry, to back down. They hadn't expected him to just stand there. The gymnasium seemed to hold its breath. Marcus could feel Lily behind him, could sense her surprise and confusion. The shrill sound of the recess bell cut through the tension. Kids began streaming toward the doors, but a circle had formed around the confrontation, hungry eyes watching for blood. Kevin leaned in close, his breath hot against Marcus's ear. "This isn't over," he hissed. "After school, you're dead." He backed away, maintaining eye contact until the last possible moment, then motioned for Zach and Tyler to follow him. As they pushed through the crowd, Marcus heard Kevin say loudly, "Looks like the dummy found herself a boyfriend. How cute." Scattered laughter followed them out of the gym. Marcus's legs were shaking so badly he thought he might collapse. The adrenaline that had propelled him across the gym was fading, leaving him hollow and terrified. What had he done? He turned to find Lily staring at him, her storm-cloud eyes wide with something like wonder. "Why did you do that?" she asked softly. Marcus shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. "They were being jerks. It wasn't fair. But now they're going to come after you too." "Yeah." He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, reality crashing back. "I guess they are." "Thank you," Lily whispered, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Northwood Elementary, Marcus saw her smile. It was small and hesitant, like something rarely used, but it transformed her face. Have you ever stood up for someone when it would have been easier to walk away? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. I read every comment, and your stories might inspire others to find their courage when it matters most. That moment in the gymnasium changed everything. Word spread through the school like wildfire. Quiet Marcus Washington had challenged Kevin Collins. By lunch, the story had grown. By dismissal, it had become legend. Marcus had thrown a punch. Marcus had threatened Kevin. Marcus was crazy. Marcus had simply walked Lily to her next class, hyper-aware of the stairs following them through the hallway. His heart rate hadn't returned to normal all day. Every time he rounded a corner, he expected to find Kevin and his crew waiting. But something unexpected happened amid the fear. Lily sat next to him at lunch, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. She placed her tray beside his and slid onto the bench without asking permission. "What are you reading?" she asked, nodding at his book. "It's about King Arthur, knights and magic and stuff." He'd expected her to laugh, but instead, her eyes lit up. "I love fantasy too." She pulled out her dragon book. "This is the third in the series. The main character has dyslexia, like me. That's why I like it so much. The letters don't jump around as bad in these books. They use a special font." Marcus had never heard anyone say like me, when talking about dyslexia. Most kids tried to hide their differences, but Lily stated it as simply as if she were saying she had brown eyes or was left-handed. "Is that why reading out loud is hard?" he asked. She nodded. "The letters switch places, or they blur together. It's like trying to read through a waterfall." Over the next few days, a fragile friendship formed between them. They discovered they both loved drawing, Marcus sketching spaceships and planets, Lily creating intricate dragons with scales that seemed to shimmer on the page. They both had collections. He gathered interesting rocks, she collected unusual feathers. They both felt like outsiders, watching the world from the edges. Being together made the school hallways feel less threatening. There was strength in having someone to sit with, to walk with, to talk with. But as their friendship grew stronger, so did Kevin's determination to punish them both. The bullying escalated to a new level. Their backpacks were dumped in toilet stalls. Crude drawings appeared on their lockers. "Retard lover" was whispered as Marcus walked past. "N-word lover" was hissed at Lily when teachers weren't listening. They were shoved in the lunch line, tripped in the hallway, excluded from group projects. The invisible bubble of hostility around them grew until even kids who might have been friendly kept their distance, afraid of becoming targets themselves. Marcus had broken rule number 4, and the consequences were exactly as he'd feared. But somehow, having Lily beside him made it bearable. They created their own world between classes and at lunch, a world of dragons and knights and distant planets where bullies couldn't reach them. Until the Thursday when Lily didn't come to school. The empty desk screamed louder than any voice. Marcus walked into Mrs. Peterson's classroom. Thursday morning, and froze in the doorway. Lily's seat, 3rd row, second from the window, was vacant. His eyes darted to the coat hooks, searching for her worn blue backpack. Nothing. Maybe she's just late, he told himself, settling into his own desk. Maybe her mom's car wouldn't start. Maybe she had a doctor's appointment. But the morning announcements came and went. Spelling tests were handed out. Lily's desk remained empty. By lunchtime, the hollow feeling in Marcus's stomach had nothing to do with hunger. He sat alone at their usual table, the empty space across from him a silent accusation. Had the bullying finally become too much? Had she begged her parents to let her stay home? Or worse, had they moved again, seeking another fresh start? Kevin and his crew noticed her absence too. As Marcus picked at his sandwich, they passed his table. "Looks like your girlfriend finally wised up," Kevin smirked. "Even retards know when to quit." Marcus stared at his lunch tray, letting the words wash over him. Without Lily sitting across from him, his invisibility felt like a curse rather than a protection. The cafeteria seemed louder, the hallways longer, the day endless. Friday morning, her desk remained empty. Mrs. Peterson placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder as he entered. "Lily's mother called. She has a bad cold and will be back on Monday." Relief washed through him, followed quickly by shame at his own selfishness. Lily was sick, possibly miserable, and all he could think about was how her absence affected him. The weekend stretched before him like an empty highway. Usually he looked forward to Saturdays, no school, no Kevin, no constant vigilance. But this Saturday felt different. He half-heartedly played video games, tried to read his new astronomy book, helped his dad wash the car. Nothing filled the strange emptiness that had settled in his chest. "You're quiet today," his mom commented as they prepared dinner. "Everything okay at school?" "Fine," he mumbled, his standard answer. How could he explain Lily? How could he tell them about Kevin's threats, about standing up in the gym, about finally having a friend who understood what it was like to be different? His parents would only worry, might even call the school. That would make everything infinitely worse. So he chopped vegetables in silence and answered their questions with one-word responses until they stopped asking. After dinner, Marcus sat at the kitchen table finishing his math homework when the doorbell rang. His mother answered it. "Can I help you?" Her voice carried a note of wariness that made Marcus look up. A deep, rumbling voice replied, "Ma'am, I'm looking for Marcus Washington. My name is Frank, but folks call me Bear." Marcus's pencil froze mid-equation. Something about that voice, a gravelly bass that seemed to vibrate the floorboards, made the hair on his arms stand up. "Marcus," his mother called, her tone tight with caution. "Someone here to see you." He pushed back from the table, a cold weight settling in his stomach. Had Kevin somehow found his address? Sent an older brother to finish what he'd started? His father appeared from the living room, standing protectively in the hallway as Marcus approached the door. The man on their porch blocked the porch light, casting his massive silhouette across the welcome mat. He was huge, well over 6 feet tall and built like a brick wall. His gray-streaked beard reached the middle of his chest, and tattoos covered every visible inch of his massive arms. He wore a black leather vest over a faded t-shirt, with patches Marcus couldn't make out in the dim light. "You're Marcus?" the giant asked, his voice surprisingly soft now. Marcus nodded, unable to form words. His father stepped closer, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. "What's this about?" his dad asked, tension evident in his voice. The enormous man knelt down on one knee, bringing himself to Marcus's eye level. Up close, his face was weathered like old leather, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes, stormy gray, exactly like Lily's, studied Marcus with unexpected gentleness. "My daughter, Lily, told me what you did," he said quietly. "She told me how those boys were hurting her, calling her names, making her feel worthless because of her dyslexia. She told me you were the only one who stood up for her." Marcus's confusion must have shown on his face, because the man's beard parted in a sudden smile. "I'm Lily's dad," he explained. "Sir, I'm not sure what this is about," Marcus's father interjected. "But if there's a problem—" "No problem at all," Bear said, standing to his full height and addressing Marcus's parents directly. "Just the opposite. Your son did something most grown men wouldn't have the balls, excuse me, ma'am, the courage to do." He pointed to a patch on his leather vest, and for the first time, Marcus could make out the distinctive winged skull emblem. "I'm with the Hells Angels MC. Most people see this patch and cross the street, but your boy, he saw my little girl hurting and put himself between her and danger." Marcus's mother gasped softly. "Hells Angels? The motorcycle gang?" "Motorcycle club, ma'am," Bear corrected gently. "But yes." Marcus stared up at the man, pieces falling into place. Kevin's words in the gym echoed in his memory. "My dad says the only people who ride those motorcycles are druggies and criminals." He'd assumed it was just another cruel lie. But Lily's father really was a biker, not just any biker, but a Hell's Angel. Bear reached out a hand the size of a dinner plate and rested it carefully on Marcus's shoulder. The weight was heavy, but somehow comforting. "Lily told me everything. How she couldn't read right because the letters move around. How those boys called her stupid and dummy. How they said her dad was trash." His voice darkened. "And she told me how you stood between her and them, even though it meant they'd come after you too." He squeezed Marcus's shoulder gently. Where I come from, we have a word for that kind of courage. We call it family. Marcus's father stepped forward. Look, Mr. Bear, was it? We appreciate you coming by, but it's getting late and— I understand, sir. Bear nodded respectfully. I just wanted your boy to know that what he did matters. Lily hasn't stopped talking about him since she got home Wednesday. First real smile I've seen on her face since we moved here. He turned back to Marcus. She's not sick, by the way. I kept her home because she was afraid to go back after what happened, but she'll be there Monday. A slow smile spread across his bearded face. And things are going to be different. You can count on that. Different how? Marcus's mother asked, her voice sharp with sudden concern. Bear straightened to his full height. Ma'am, I believe in handling problems directly, but I also believe in doing right by those who do right by my family. He looked down at Marcus again. Your boy protected my daughter when no one else would. Now he's under our protection too. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. He pulled a small card from his pocket and handed it to Marcus's father. My number. Anything happens to your boy at that school, anything at all, you call me, day or night. With a final nod to Marcus, Bear walked back to the curb where an enormous black motorcycle gleamed under the streetlight. The engine roared to life with a thunderous growl that vibrated the windows. Then he was gone, leaving only the fading rumble and the scent of leather and exhaust in his wake. Marcus's parents closed the door and turned to him, their faces etched with identical expressions of shock and concern. Marcus, his mother said slowly, you need to tell us exactly what's been going on at school. He looked from his mother to his father, then down at the business card in his dad's trembling hand. Custom motorcycle design, Frank Bear Anderson. And beneath it, small but unmistakable, Hell's Angels MC. It's a long story, Marcus said quietly. We've got time, his father replied, guiding him toward the living room sofa, and I think we need to hear all of it. As Marcus began to speak, unleashing months of bottled-up stories about Kevin's bullying, about Lily's arrival, about the confrontation in the gym, a strange feeling settled over him. For the first time since he could remember, he wasn't worried about going to school on Monday. Bear's words echoed in his mind. Things are going to be different. He just had no idea how different they would be. Monday morning arrived with unnatural stillness. Marcus woke before his alarm, a nervous energy humming through his veins. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying Bear's words over and over. Things are going to be different. His parents had spent the weekend in heated discussions behind closed doors. He'd caught fragments. Call the school, police involvement, not our world. But they'd reached no clear decision on what to do about the Hell's Angel who had appeared on their doorstep. Just stay close to teachers today, his mother said, as she packed his lunch, dark circles under her eyes. And if anything happens, anything at all, you go straight to the principal's office. Marcus nodded, though he doubted Mr. Phillips would be much help. The principal had perfected the art of looking concerned while doing nothing. He was pouring milk on his cereal when he felt it. A vibration. So faint at first that he thought he'd imagined it. Just the slightest tremor in his spoon against the bowl. Then it grew. The milk rippled in tiny concentric circles. The windows began to hum. Pictures rattled against the walls. Marcus's hand froze midway to his mouth. His father appeared in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand. Do you feel that? Before Marcus could answer, the vibration deepened into a low, rhythmic rumble. not the sharp crash of thunder or the mechanical grind of construction. This was organic, pulsing, alive, the collective heartbeat of dozens of engines moving in concert, and it was getting louder. Marcus ran to the living room window and peered through the blinds. His cereal bowl clattered forgotten on the kitchen table. "Mom, Dad, you need to see this." His parents joined him at the window, and 3 pairs of eyes widened at the sight unfolding on their quiet suburban street. Motorcycles, not 5 or 10 or even 20, hundreds. They rolled in like a chrome tide, 2 by 2, their engines a synchronized growl that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Harley-Davidsons, Indians, custom choppers with gleaming pipes and intricate paintwork, a river of steel and power flowing into every available space along the curb. And on them, riders, men and women of all ages, races, and sizes, united by leather vests covered in patches and a steady, purposeful demeanor. They didn't yell or rev their engines unnecessarily. They simply arrived, took their positions, and waited, a silent, formidable army. "Jesus Christ," Marcus's father whispered. Marcus pressed his face closer to the glass, scanning the sea of bikes. His eyes caught on patches, the familiar winged skull of the Hells Angels, but others too. Mongols, bandidos, outlaws, pagans. Clubs he'd seen warnings about on TV documentaries. Clubs that, according to those same documentaries, would sooner shoot each other than ride together. Yet, here they were, side by side, an impossible alliance formed for some purpose he couldn't begin to comprehend. At the very front of the procession, parked directly in front of their driveway, sat Bear on an enormous black Harley with custom flames painted along the fuel tank. And behind him, holding tight to his waist, her small frame dwarfed by a leather jacket and helmet, was Lily. "What the hell is happening?" his mother asked, her voice barely audible over the idling engines. The doorbell rang. All 3 Washingtons jumped. For a moment, nobody moved. The bell rang again, more insistent this time. Marcus's father squared his shoulders. "Stay here," he commanded, moving toward the door with the cautious determination of a man walking into unknown territory. Marcus and his mother crept into the hallway behind him, unable to contain their curiosity and fear. Through the narrow window beside the front door, Marcus could see Bear's massive silhouette on the porch. His father opened the door just wide enough to speak. "Mr. Anderson, what is the meaning of this?" Bear's voice was surprisingly respectful. "Good morning, sir. Sorry to disturb you and your family so early. We're here to escort Marcus to school today." "Escort him to—" His father's voice faltered as he took in the full scene beyond their front yard. "There must be 200 motorcycles out there." 350, actually, Bear corrected mildly. "Word travels fast in our community. Your son stood up for one of our own when nobody else would. That means something to us." Lily peered around her father's massive frame, her storm-cloud eyes finding Marcus. She gave him a small, shy wave. "This is completely inappropriate," Marcus's mother said, stepping forward. "You can't just show up with an army of... "Ma'am," Bear interrupted gently, "I understand your concern, but I promise you, no harm will come to your son. Quite the opposite." He turned his gaze to Marcus. "Those boys who've been hurting Lily, who threatened you, they need to understand that actions have consequences, that when you target the vulnerable, there are people who will stand up and say, 'No more.'" He gestured behind him to the lined-up motorcycles. Every person out there has been bullied at some point, or had a child who was bullied. Today, we're showing your son what solidarity looks like." Marcus stepped forward, drawn by something powerful he couldn't name. "Mom, Dad, I want to go with them." His parents exchanged a look of helpless concern. "You can follow in your car if you'd like," Bear offered. "See that your boy gets to school safe. But I give you my word, he'll be the most protected kid in the state for as long as we're with him." After a tense minute of silent communication between his parents, Marcus's father nodded reluctantly. "I'll get my keys," he said. Marcus ran upstairs to grab his backpack, heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Through his bedroom window, he could see neighbors emerging from their homes, standing on porches and driveways, staring in disbelief at the battalion of motorcycles lining their normally quiet street. Mrs. Abernathy from next door was clutching her bathrobe closed at her throat, mouth hanging open. Mr. Rodriguez across the street was frantically taking pictures with his phone. 2 police cruisers had pulled up at the far end of the block, officers standing beside their vehicles, speaking into radios while surveying the scene with obvious uncertainty. When Marcus came back downstairs, Bear handed him a small leather jacket and helmet. "These were my son's when he was about your age," he explained. "Thought you might want to look the part today." The jacket was well worn but clean, surprisingly heavy across Marcus's shoulders. It smelled of leather and distant roads, and something indefinable that felt like strength. Bear knelt to help him fasten the helmet strap. "You'll ride with one of my brothers today," he said. "Fellow named Crusher. Don't let the name fool you. He's got 3 kids of his own and coaches Little League." He pointed to a barrel-chested man on a gleaming blue Harley who gave Marcus a solemn nod. "You scared?" Bear asked quietly, so only Marcus could hear. Marcus swallowed hard and nodded. Bear smiled. "Good. Means you're smart. But remember, being brave isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling afraid and doing the right thing anyway, just like you did for my Lily." If you believe in standing up against bullies, hit that like button right now. Let's show the world that courage is contagious and that nobody should face their battles alone. The procession to school was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Crusher helped him climb onto the back of his motorcycle, showing him where to put his feet and how to hold on. "Lean when I lean," he instructed, in a voice that sounded like gravel being poured. "And enjoy the ride, little man. Not every day you get a royal escort." With Bear and Lily in the lead, the column of motorcycles rumbled to life. The sound was no longer just noise. It was a physical force that Marcus could feel reverberating through his entire body, a thunder he was now part of. They pulled away from the curb in perfect formation, 2 by 2, a mechanized cavalry rolling through the quiet suburban streets. Behind them, Marcus's parents followed in their sedan, his father's knuckles white on the steering wheel, his mother's face a mask of worried disbelief. People emerged from houses as they passed. Some stared in stunned silence. Others grabbed phones to record the spectacle. A few waved, seeming to understand instinctively that this was not a threatening presence, but a protective one. Marcus felt something shift inside him as they rode. The fear that had been his constant companion since the confrontation in the gym began to dissolve, replaced by a strange, powerful calm. 350 men and women, strangers who owed him nothing, had come together because he had done the right thing, because he had stood up when it would have been easier to stay seated. Wind rushed past his helmet. The morning sun glinted off chrome. The rumble of engines synchronized into a battle hymn that seemed to declare, "Not today, not this child, not on our watch." For the first time in his life, Marcus wasn't trying to be invisible. He sat tall on the back of Crusher's motorcycle, feeling the eyes of the world on him, and not minding at all. The boy who had spent years learning how to disappear was now at the center of the most visible, audible procession his town had ever seen. And it felt like flying. As they approached the final turn toward Northwood Elementary, Bear raised his fist in the air. The signal rippled back through the column of riders, and as one, they revved their engines. The sound was deafening, primal, a battle cry, a warning, a celebration. Crusher leaned back slightly. "That's for you, kid," he shouted over the roar. "That's what thunder sounds like when it's on your side." Northwood Elementary had never seen anything like it. The Monday morning drop-off routine was proceeding with its usual clockwork precision. Yellow buses lined the curved driveway, disgorging sleepy-eyed children. Parents in SUVs and sedans crawled through the car line, dispensing last-minute instructions and forgotten lunchboxes. Teachers clutched coffee cups on the sidewalk, greeting students with manufactured Monday cheer. Principal Phillips stood at the main entrance in his standard position, checking watches against his own, frowning at untucked shirts and contraband candy. Then came the rumble. It started as a distant vibration, barely perceptible beneath the normal morning chaos. But it grew quickly, an approaching storm front that caused heads to turn toward the main road. The first bikes appeared over the hill, a gleaming front line of chrome and steel, riders sitting straight-backed and purposeful. And behind them, more, and more, and more. The normal sounds of morning, children's chatter, car doors slamming, teachers calling greetings, faded into stunned silence. The procession of motorcycles filled the main road completely, a river of metal flowing toward the school with unstoppable momentum. "Oh my God," whispered Ms. Abernathy, the front office secretary who had rushed outside at the commotion. "Should we call the police?" Principal Phillips stood frozen, his attendance clipboard hanging forgotten at his side. "They're coming here," he said, his voice barely audible. "They're actually coming here." The first motorcycles turned into the school driveway, Bear and Lily in the lead. Behind them came Crusher with Marcus, followed by row after row of bikers. They filled the drop-off lane, then the bus lane, then the visitor parking lot, and finally began lining up along both sides of the entrance road. Parents scrambled to pull their cars aside, some abandoning vehicles halfway through the drop-off line to grab their children and hurry inside. Teachers herded students away from the curb, forming a protective barrier of adult bodies between the children and the approaching armada. Only when the last motorcycle had found its place did the engines cut out, one by one, like dominoes falling in reverse. The sudden silence was somehow more intimidating than the noise had been. 350 riders sat motionless on their bikes, faces impassive behind sunglasses and beards, leather vests displaying patches from clubs that law enforcement considered among the most dangerous in the country. Bear dismounted first, helping Lily off the back of his bike. Crusher did the same for Marcus. The four of them stood at the front of the motorcycle brigade, facing the school entrance, where Principal Phillips and a hastily assembled group of teachers now stood. Marcus could feel hundreds of eyes watching from classroom windows, faces pressed against the glass in disbelief. He spotted his parents' car pulling into a distant space in the parent lot, both of them rushing toward the scene with expressions of horrified fascination. Bear placed one massive hand on Marcus's shoulder and the other on Lily's, guiding them toward the school entrance. Behind them, without command or signal, every biker dismounted and formed a line, shoulder to shoulder, a wall of leather and denim and silent, patient power. Principal Phillips took an involuntary step back as they approached. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "This is a school zone. You can't just—" "Morning, sir," Bear interrupted calmly. "We're just making sure these two young people get to class safely today." The principal's eyes darted from Bear's patch to the line of bikers, clearly calculating how quickly this situation could spiral out of control. "I'm going to have to ask you all to leave immediately before I call the authorities." "Already here, Gary," came a voice from behind him. A police officer, Marcus recognized him as Officer Ramirez, who sometimes visited for DARE presentations, was walking toward them, his hand resting cautiously on his belt. "Everything okay here?" Before Phillips could answer, Bear extended his hand to the officer. "Frank Anderson, my daughter Lily is a student here. We're just dropping the kids off for school." Officer Ramirez looked at the hand, then at the hundreds of bikers standing in silent formation behind Bear. After a moment's hesitation, he shook it. "That's quite an escort. These children have been experiencing some bullying problems," Bear explained, his voice pleasant but firm. "We wanted to make sure they understood they're not alone." At the word bullying, Principal Phillips's face tightened. Marcus realized the man was suddenly aware that whatever was happening might eventually involve questions about why the school had allowed the situation to develop in the first place. "Mr. Anderson," Phillips said, forcing a conciliatory tone, "I assure you, if there have been bullying incidents, the school takes such matters very seriously. But this display is not the appropriate way to address such concerns." Bear smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Respectfully, sir, we tried the appropriate way. My wife has called this school 6 times since we moved here. She's sent emails. She's requested meetings. The response has been—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Inadequate." Officer Ramirez looked between Bear and the principal, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. "Maybe we should take this conversation to your office, Gary. Let the kids get to class." Phillips nodded stiffly. "Fine. Mr. Anderson, if you'd like to come inside, we can discuss this privately." "Happy to," Bear agreed. "But first, I need a moment with the children." He knelt down, bringing his massive frame to Marcus and Lily's level. Behind them, Marcus's parents had finally reached the scene, hovering uncertainly at the edges of the confrontation. "You two walk in there with your heads high," Bear said softly, his voice meant for them alone. "Nobody is going to hurt you today. Nobody is even going to look at you wrong." He glanced up, his eyes scanning the gathered students until they locked on 3 boys huddled near the bike racks: Kevin, Zach, and Tyler, their faces pale with shock and fear. "Those boys over there, they're not going to bother you again. Not today. Not ever." His voice remained gentle, but there was steel beneath it. "You know why?" Lily shook her head, her storm cloud eyes wide. "Because wolves don't hunt when the pack is watching," Bear said. "And make no mistake," he nodded toward the line of bikers standing at silent attention, "this is your pack now, every single one of them." He straightened, towering over them once more. "Now go on, get to class, learn something." A small smile crinkled the edges of his eyes. "We'll be right here when school lets out." Marcus's mother stepped forward, finally finding her voice. "You're staying? All day?" Bear turned to her with a respectful nod. "Just a few of us, ma'am. The rest have jobs to get to. But we'll have someone here all day. And we'll all be back this afternoon." He glanced at Marcus. "If that's all right with you." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. Marcus nodded, suddenly feeling 10 feet tall. With the silent grace of longtime partners, the bikers began to disperse, most returning to their motorcycles while about 20 remained, stationing themselves at strategic points around the school perimeter. There were no shouts, no revving engines, no dramatic gestures, just the quiet precision of people who understood their purpose and had executed similar operations before. As Marcus and Lily walked through the parted sea of stunned onlookers toward the school entrance, the whispers began. Eyes that had always looked through Marcus now tracked his every move. Students who had ignored Lily now stared in open fascination. Kevin and his friends remained frozen by the bike rack, their earlier bravado replaced by something Marcus had never seen on their faces before. Fear. The power had shifted. Everyone could feel it. Inside the building, the usual Monday morning chaos was replaced by an electric silence. Teachers who had never bothered to learn Marcus's name suddenly greeted him with forced brightness. Students who had participated in Lily's torment by their silence now smiled tentatively, as if auditioning for the role of friend. As they reached Lily's locker, Marcus realized something profound had happened. The invisible shield he'd spent years perfecting, the one meant to help him disappear, had been replaced by something stronger. A visible shield made of leather and chrome, and the unspoken promise of protection. For the first time in his school life, Marcus Washington wasn't trying to be invisible. He was seen. He was protected. He belonged. And from the look on Kevin's face as he slunk into class 15 minutes late, eyes fixed firmly on the floor, everyone else knew it too. By lunchtime, word of the morning's events had spread through Northwood Elementary like wildfire. Every classroom buzzed with whispered accounts, each version more elaborate than the last. In the third-grade version, the bikers had threatened to burn down the school. In the fifth-grade telling, Marcus was secretly the son of a biker gang president. By sixth grade, Lily had become a princess of an underground motorcycle kingdom. The truth was powerful enough without embellishment. Marcus and Lily walked into the cafeteria together, and the room fell into a hush so sudden it was like someone had hit a mute button. Then came the wave, students shifting to make room, offering seats at tables that had been closed to them just days earlier. Smiles appeared on faces that had previously held only sneers. Girls who had ignored Lily now complimented her backpack. Boys who had laughed at Kevin's jokes now asked Marcus about his ride to school. "Was it scary on the motorcycle?" asked Emma Watson, the same girl who had once asked to touch Marcus's hair like he was an exhibit. "No," Marcus answered simply. "It felt safe." Through the cafeteria windows, they could see 3 massive bikers sitting on their motorcycles in the parking lot, silent sentinels keeping watch. One raised a hand in greeting when he noticed the children looking out. Kevin, Zach, and Tyler were nowhere to be seen. Rumors circulated that they were eating in the counselor's office, too afraid to show their faces. After lunch, an announcement crackled over the intercom. "Attention students and staff. There will be a special assembly tomorrow morning on the topic of bullying prevention and community respect. Attendance is mandatory for all grades." Marcus caught Lily's eye across the classroom, and they both suppressed a smile. The assembly hadn't been on the calendar yesterday. When the final bell rang, they walked outside to find not 20 bikers, but nearly 100 waiting in the parking lot. Bear stood at the front, his massive arms crossed over his chest, a silent guardian watching over not just his daughter, but every child who exited the building. Principal Phillips emerged from the building, looking harried but determined. He headed straight for Bear, a manila folder clutched in his hand. Mr. Anderson, he said loudly enough for nearby parents to hear, I've been reviewing our anti-bullying protocols, and I'd like to invite you to join our school safety committee. Your perspective could be valuable. Bear's beard twitched with what might have been a suppressed smile. Happy to help, Principal Phillips. I know some folks who specialize in protecting vulnerable kids. Maybe they could speak at your assembly tomorrow. The principal's smile became fixed, but he nodded. That would be educational. As Marcus waited for his parents' car to reach the pickup point, he felt a tug on his sleeve. Lily stood beside him, her storm-cloud eyes clearer than he'd ever seen them. Thank you, she said softly, for being brave first. Marcus shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. I just did what the heroes in my books would do. That's what makes you a real hero, she replied. And now look what happened. She gestured around them, where bikers were helping kindergartners find their parents, posing for pictures with awestruck students, and speaking quietly with grateful mothers who had finally heard the full stories of what their children had endured. Bear approached, Lily's backpack slung over one massive shoulder like a child's purse. Ready to head home, Princess? He asked, then turned to Marcus. Your folks coming? They texted they're stuck in traffic, Marcus explained, showing his phone. Bear nodded. No problem. You're riding with us. We'll drop you off. At Marcus's hesitation, he added, Already cleared it with your mom. She says meatloaf at 6:30. Don't be late. On the ride home, with Lily sandwiched between him and Bear on the massive motorcycle, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years at Northwood. Peace. No looking over his shoulder, no calculating escape routes, no invisible shield necessary. That evening, as Marcus helped his mother set the table for dinner, she asked the question that had clearly been bothering her all day. What happens when they stop coming? When the bikers aren't there anymore? Marcus considered this, then smiled. They don't have to keep coming, Mom. The message has been delivered. And he was right. Bear and a rotating honor guard would appear at pickup and drop-off for the next 2 weeks. By the 3rd week, their numbers had dwindled to just a handful. By the 4th, only Bear remained, a solitary sentinel ensuring the message stuck. But their physical presence had never been the true protection. What they had brought, what had changed everything, was the knowledge that Marcus and Lily were not alone. That beyond the school's walls existed a force willing to mobilize at a moment's notice if harm came their way again. If you believe every vulnerable child deserves protection, whether from family, friends, or even complete strangers willing to stand up for what's right, share this video right now. Let's spread the message that sometimes it only takes one person to start a movement that changes everything. 6 months after the thunderous arrival of 350 bikers at Northwood Elementary, the world had largely forgotten about it. Local news coverage had faded. YouTube videos of the event had slipped down search rankings. Even the Bikers Against Bullying assembly had become just another school memory. But for Marcus Washington, everything had changed. He no longer walked the hallways with his head down. His books, once shields to hide behind, were now simply books, fascinating portals to worlds he loved and freely discussed with anyone who asked. The careful calculations he'd made for years, how to be present but not visible, how to exist without being noticed, had been replaced by something revolutionary, the freedom to simply be himself. One crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus sat beneath the oak tree in his backyard, sketching a spaceship design while Lily worked on her latest dragon drawing beside him. They'd fallen into an easy friendship, spending afternoons together at least twice a week, their shared experience having forged a bond that defied the usual social boundaries of elementary school. "My dad says they're doing it again next month," Lily said, adding intricate scales to her dragon's tail. "At a school in Brighton. Some kids were picking on a boy with autism." Marcus nodded, not surprised. What had started as one spontaneous act of solidarity had evolved into something more organized. Bear and riders from various clubs now regularly responded to serious bullying situations across the state, their approach refined, but no less effective. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Marcus asked. "How crazy it all was?" Lily smiled, her once stormy eyes now habitually clear and confident. "All the time. It's when I learned that sometimes the scary-looking people are the ones with the biggest hearts." That was the first lesson their experience had taught them. Heroes rarely look like the ones in storybooks. Sometimes they're quiet black boys who find their voice at exactly the right moment. Sometimes they're dyslexic girls who weather cruelty without letting it break their spirit. And sometimes they're leather-clad men with tattoos and gruff voices who understand what it means to be judged by appearance alone. The second lesson was about courage, not the fearless kind that exists only in movies, but the trembling, uncertain kind that acts despite the knot in your stomach and the shakiness in your knees. The kind that whispers, "This might end badly for me," and stands up anyway. But perhaps the most important lesson was about the power of unexpected alliances. How a black boy from a quiet suburban family, a white girl whose father belonged to a motorcycle club, and hundreds of bikers from rival groups could find common ground in the simple belief that the vulnerable deserve protection, that some lines should never be crossed, that standing together creates a strength no bully can overcome. Kevin had eventually transferred to another school. Not because anyone had threatened him, no one had needed to. He'd simply recognized that the world had shifted, that his power had evaporated in the rumble of motorcycles and the silent solidarity they represented. Principal Phillips had followed through on his anti-bullying initiatives, partly from genuine conviction, and partly from the knowledge that 350 bikers remained just one phone call away. The thunder had faded, but its echo remained. In the confident way Marcus raised his hand in class, in the friendships that had blossomed across social boundaries, in the knowledge carried by every student at Northwood that cruelty would not be tolerated, not by teachers, not by parents, and certainly not by the unexpected alliance that had formed that Monday morning. Sometimes, when Marcus rides his bike particularly fast down a hill, he still feels it, that sense of power and protection, of belonging to something larger than himself. It lives in his chest now, a permanent rumble that reminds him, one person standing up can start a movement. One brave act can summon an army. One moment can change everything. And that's the story of how a quiet boy's courage brought thunder to a schoolyard and forever changed the meaning of protection, belonging, and family. If this story moved something inside you, if it made you think differently about courage or protection or who your allies might truly be, hit that subscribe button right now. Because in a world that often feels divided, we need reminders that unexpected heroes exist everywhere, just waiting for the moment to reveal themselves. Subscribe for more true stories that will change how you see the world, one thunderous revelation at a time.